Ancient writers claimed 70,000 men. War elephants from India. Armored cavalry that gleamed like a river of iron. Scythed chariots, camel riders, and a pike phalanx in the direct tradition of Alexander the Great. That was the army Antiochus III was said to have brought to the plain of Magnesia. The exact figure is disputed, but every surviving account agrees on the essential point: the Seleucid king held a formidable numerical advantage. Facing him stood perhaps 30,000 Romans and allies, far from home, at the end of a long supply line, in the first campaign Rome had ever fought in Asia. By nightfall, the Seleucid army had ceased to exist as a fighting force. This is the story of how that happened. Not because the Romans were braver, and not because the Seleucids were fools, but because Rome's different arms continued to support one another as the battle changed, while the Seleucid army's most powerful components were gradually forced to fight separate battles. To understand why these two powers met at all, we need the shape of the Mediterranean in the early 2nd century BC. In the west, Rome had just finished the war of its life. Hannibal was defeated, Carthage humbled, and the Republic's legions were battle-hardened in a way no army in the region could match. In the east, the largest of the kingdoms carved from Alexander's conquests, the Seleucid Empire, had found a ruler worthy of its size. Antiochus III had spent 2 decades reconquering lost provinces from Persia to the coast of Asia Minor. His own court called him Antiochus the Great. He had earned the title. 2 expanding powers. 1 sea between them. In 192 BC, Antiochus crossed into Greece, presenting himself as its liberator from Roman interference. Rome read the move differently, as a challenge that could not stand. The war that followed went badly for the king. Beaten at Thermopylae in 191, he abandoned Greece. Then his fleets lost control of the Aegean, and with it, the one barrier that mattered. For the first time in history, a Roman army crossed into Asia. There was one more detail that made this war personal for Rome. At the Seleucid court sat Hannibal Barca, the man who had marched elephants over the Alps. He was not at Magnesia. The king had given him a fleet, and that fleet had already been beaten at sea. But his presence at court tells you how Rome saw this war, as the final act of a much older struggle. The Roman army that marched into Lydia was commanded, on paper, by the consul Lucius Cornelius Scipio. On paper, because at his side, as an advisor, rode his older brother, Scipio Africanus, the conqueror of Hannibal. Ancient writers tell us Africanus was ill when the battle came. Lucius Scipio remained the nominal commander, while the legate Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus and King Eumenes directed crucial parts of the line. Rome still possessed experienced officers at every level. The Roman army did not depend on a single brilliant mind making every decision. Its strength lay in a command structure that could continue functioning even when parts of the field disappeared from view. That was, in a sense, the whole point of it. Its core was 4 legions in the classic 3-line formation: hastati, principes, triarii, flexible blocks of heavy infantry that could feed reserves forward, wheel, and reform under pressure. On the Roman right rode their most valuable ally, Eumenes II, king of Pergamon, with cavalry that knew this country, and had every reason to fight for it. Across the plain, Antiochus commanded a force ancient writers put at 70,000 or more, a figure modern historians treat with suspicion, though most agree he outnumbered the Romans heavily. At its heart stood 16,000 pikemen in the Macedonian-style, a phalanx 32 ranks deep, with war elephants stationed in the gaps between its blocks. Around this core, Antiochus had gathered the whole empire: armored cataphracts from the Iranian plateau, horse archers, Galatian warbands, Arab camel riders, and scythed chariots, blades fixed to the wheels, built to carve lanes through infantry. It was magnificent. It was also a catalogue of almost every military tradition the empire could summon. Each arm was dangerous in its proper role, but coordinating pikes, elephants, chariots, archers, camels, mercenaries, and several kinds of cavalry across an enormous front demanded exceptional control. On a clear day, that would have been difficult. In mist it would become decisive. The two armies found each other near Magnesia ad Sipylum, in the valley of the Hermus River, in the winter of 190 BC. Some accounts place the battle in the last days of the year, others at the start of 189. The ground itself favored the king. An open plain, exactly what a phalanx and massed cavalry need. Antiochus had fortified a camp, protecting the road to Sardis, and could afford to wait. The Romans could not. It was winter, their supply line ran back to the coast, and the consul's year in office was running out. For several days the Romans offered battle, and the king declined. Then, on a damp, misty morning, both armies came out in full. That mist matters, and Livy makes a point of it. The haze hung over the plain, and it did not trouble both sides equally. The Roman line was compact, its officers could still see most of it. The Seleucid front was vastly longer. From the center, its distant wings vanished into gray. Moisture relaxed bowstrings, slings, and the throwing straps used by some javelin troops. The weather did not make those weapons useless, but it reduced the effectiveness of the soldiers on whom Antiochus depended to screen and coordinate his enormous formation. Before a single order was given, the larger army had already lost some of its ability to act as one thing. Watch how the two commanders arranged their men, because the battle's outcome is written in the deployment. The Romans anchored their left on the river, leaving only a token force of cavalry there, 120 horsemen. Everything else they concentrated where it could be used, legions in the center, Eumenes, and nearly all the cavalry on the open right flank. Antiochus placed his phalanx in the center, in 10 blocks with elephants between them, and split his best cavalry between both wings. And then he made the decision that defines this battle. He took personal command of the cataphracts on his own right wing. The king of Asia positioned himself not where the battle would be decided, but where the charging would be best. He had done this before. 27 years earlier, at Raphia, a younger Antiochus had led his wing to a glorious local victory, chased the beaten enemy off the field, and returned to find his center destroyed and the battle lost. Keep Raphia in mind. It is about to happen again. The battle opened on the Seleucid left, and it opened with the weapon everyone remembers, the scythed chariots. In theory, they were terror on wheels. In practice, a chariot is only as brave as its horses, and horses do not volunteer for this work. Eumenes saw it at once. Rather than receive the charge, he sent forward his Cretan archers, slingers, and light horsemen with orders to do one thing: hurt the animals. Arrows and lead-sling bullets met the chariots halfway. Wounded horses bolted, swerved, overturned their own vehicles, and then drove back through the troops behind them. The blades meant for Roman infantry cut into the camel riders and armored cavalry of their own wing. Formations opened to let the wreckage pass, and did not close cleanly. Eumenes charged into that confusion with everything he had. The Seleucid left wing, struck while still disordered, broke. The battle was still young, and one of the king's most important flanks was already streaming toward the camp. A weapon that requires the enemy to be frightened is not a weapon. It is a bet. And the Romans had stopped taking that bet a generation earlier. But on the far side of the field, none of this was visible. Remember the mist, remember the distance. There, Antiochus was proving that Seleucid cavalry, properly led, was still among the finest in the world. His cataphracts came down on the Roman left, the flank guarded by 120 horsemen, and the legion beside the river. The line bent, then broke. Roman and Latin infantry fell back toward their own camp, with the king's cavalry driving them, and for perhaps the only time that day, legionaries ran. Antiochus did exactly what a warrior would do, and exactly what a commander must not. He pursued. Deeper and deeper toward the Roman camp, further and further from the place where his empire was being decided. At the camp, a military tribune named Marcus Aemilius did something unglamorous and decisive. He stopped the fugitives, reformed them, and held the gate. The pursuit stalled against a scratch defense. And now ask the only question that matters: while the king is here, hammering at a camp, who is coordinating the rest of his army? The Phalanx still had a commander. Appian names an officer called Philip, and other commanders remained with the skirmishers and wings. But no one in the center possessed Antiochus's authority over the army as a whole. The king had taken the one command that could unite the battlefield, and carried it out of sight. The Seleucid center had done nothing wrong. That is the tragedy of it. 16,000 professional pikemen stood in formation, ready to fight the battle they had trained for, a frontal collision on open ground, where a wall of sarissa points is very nearly unbeatable. The Romans declined to fight that battle. With the Seleucid left gone, Eumenes horsemen and the Roman infantry curled around the Phalanx's exposed flank. Appian describes the pikemen closing into a vast defensive square, presenting sarissas on every side, and taking the surviving light troops into their protection. Elephants stationed among the Phalanx blocks were now trapped inside the compressed formation, and there the center stood, still disciplined, still formidable, but almost unable to maneuver. What followed was not a duel, but a dismantling. The legions did not charge the pikes. They stood off and threw javelins, arrows, sling bullets, volley after volley into a formation too dense to miss. A phalanx can survive this for a while. Elephants cannot. The animals, wounded, deafened, hemmed in by their own men, panicked. Not all 54 Seleucid elephants had been placed within the phalanx, but those stationed between its blocks were enough. As the animals became unmanageable, they turned into battering rams inside the compressed formation, opening gaps in the one body that was still holding together. Through those gaps, the legionaries could finally go in with the sword. The best infantry in Asia was destroyed without ever losing a fair fight. The Romans simply refused to offer one. Antiochus turned back from the Roman camp, to find the plain telling him the whole story at once, his left gone, his center a mound of wreckage, his camp about to fall. Ancient writers say he fled toward Sardis with what cavalry he could hold together. The figures they give for the slaughter, 50,000 dead, are almost certainly exaggerated, as ancient casualty figures usually are. Livy and Appian also report remarkably light Roman losses. Their precise totals cannot be verified, and modern reconstructions differ sharply. But the precise arithmetic misses the point. Armies of that era did not die on the field, they died when they broke, in the pursuit, and this army broke completely. The peace signed at Apamea 2 years later shows what kind of defeat this was. Antiochus surrendered his possessions in Asia Minor beyond the Taurus Mountains, gave up his war elephants, accepted severe limits on his fleet, and agreed to pay 15,000 talents of silver, one of the heaviest indemnities imposed in the ancient world. The empire did not collapse at Magnesia. It still controlled Syria, Mesopotamia, and extensive lands farther east. But its westward ambitions were broken, its treasury was burdened for years, and its prestige had suffered a wound that later rulers would struggle to repair. Magnesia did not destroy the Seleucid state in one afternoon, it changed the limits within which that state could act. And Rome? Rome went home. No provinces were annexed, no garrisons left behind. But every king in the East had watched one of Asia's greatest armies disappear in an afternoon, and drew the obvious conclusion. Rome had demonstrated that it could cross the sea, defeat a Hellenistic great power on its own ground, and then decide how the map would be redrawn. It had not annexed the conquered lands, but it had become the decisive outside power in the eastern Mediterranean. Antiochus had cavalry the Romans could not match, and it won its part of the field. He had infantry the Romans were unwilling to attack head-on, and it remained formidable until isolation and missile fire destroyed its cohesion. Several of his strongest pieces performed brilliantly. Others collapsed before the main contest had fully begun. the whole failed because magnificent weapons, increasingly forced to fight separate battles, met an army whose parts continued to support one another. That was the lesson written on the plain at Magnesia. Alexander's successors had spent more than a century refining the weapons that dominated the Hellenistic battlefield. At Magnesia, Rome showed that winning the next age of war would depend on more than perfecting each weapon in isolation. It would depend on keeping the entire army connected when the plan began to fail.